This is Mari Robeson with Love Lulu Creative, a podcast that supports and celebrates artists and creative entrepreneurs. This is episode number 53. And on today's show, I have animation recruiter for Netflix, Sam Goff. Sam works with the Netflix animation family as an outreach and engagement coordinator. Her focus in that department is working internally with productions and cross-functional departments to make sure early career individuals at Netflix Animation Studios have a comfortable and enriching professional growth experience. Additionally, she is working on creating programming to further break down the barriers to entry for the animation industry. She's also an animator herself. Very, very talented. And I'm telling you, if you are interested in animation and what it's like to work in that industry, this is the episode for you. Also, make sure that you follow Sam over on TikTok. She gives a lot of weekly advice over there and on Instagram as well. I will put the links to her social media in the show notes, so make sure to follow her. She is lovely and talented, and she's also an animator herself. So she knows both sides of the industry and is very knowledgeable and offers some wonderful advice on today's show. So stay tuned. And also, if you are enjoying these episodes, please hit that subscribe button, share it with your creative friends. It really does help get the message of supporting the arts out there. And I also personally deeply appreciate it. So stay tuned now for episode number 53 with Sam Goff. Hi, Sam. I'm so excited to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for joining us and for sharing all this wonderful information.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So you are an animation recruiter, outreach and engagement for Netflix, and you are also an animator yourself, correct?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So are you pursuing both of those at the same time?
Yeah. So where I'm at right now is the recruiting is my full-time job. And then I work as a CG surfacing artist in my spare time as a freelance artist.
Nice. Oh, I love that. Okay, well, we're going to get into all of that, but I'd like to go back to a little bit further in your creative journey and ask you kind of the paths that you took that led you to where you are today. So was animation something that you were always interested, like in junior high or high school? Is there something that you knew that you wanted to go into?
It was. I've known what I wanted to do with my life since I was in junior high when I fell in love with anime. My gateway drug was Dragon Ball Z. And from there it was all things nerdy and anime. I started drawing, I started studying Japanese language and culture, and I started watching and consuming all the kind of animated content that I could. And that's kind of sustained me all the way through my career 20 years later.
So good. So did you study this? So then you went to college, and where did you go study this in college?
Yeah, I went to Loyola Marymount University, which is located in Los Angeles. And they have a pretty prestigious film school. And so I got into the film school as an animation major, which is actually a bit of a hybrid between the film school and the art school. And I got my degree, my BA in animation.
That is awesome. And that is a beautiful school. I've been on the campus. It's gorgeous. And
it really is.
And it was fun being on campus because they were shooting films. Like when I was touring it with one of my daughters, and yeah, it's a beautiful campus, and I knew it was known for film. So wow, that's great.
There have been a couple times when I've been watching a TV show or something, and I'm like, oh, that's my campus.
That's so crazy. That's fun. I know. I think people think if you live in California, like everything's a movie set, but it's not really like that. LA is kind of its own animal down there. Okay, so but you also minored in Asian studies, correct? Which makes sense with your love of anime.
Yeah, so I had started studying, like in high school, you had to pick a language to study, and I had the opportunity to have Japanese be my language. And so I wanted to continue that into school. And I know myself, and I know that I need structure in order to like really dedicate myself to something. So that's why I chose to also take the minor. So East Asian Studies focused on Japan.
Amazing. My daughters would be so jealous of this right now. So after college, you went to Japan and you taught English, is that correct?
I did. I actually went to Japan first. Well, first was in high school as a part of like a study trip when I was studying the language there. But that was just for like a week
Oh,
long
you did a
trip.
study abroad? Wow.
Yeah, so I had like a quick 1 week exchange program in high school, and that really got my appetite whet for spending time in Japan. So I took advantage of the study abroad program in college as well, and I spent an entire semester living and going to school in the heart of Tokyo, which
Wow.
was an absolutely amazing experience that I would not trade for the world.
Wow. That is so great. So then, was it your decision right after college to go teach there?
It, I was kind of forced into it,
Oh.
but I went willingly because I graduated into the recession, the housing
Mm,
recession.
mm-hmm.
So there was no work to be found, like even at my local grocery store, let alone getting a job in the
Yeah,
animation industry.
right.
So I took that opportunity to go back to Japan and teach English for roughly 2.5 years. Um, as really as like a means to an end.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's so interesting. 100 years ago, when I graduated college, my roommate did the same thing, but she ended up getting married and staying there and having 2 kids. But
Yeah, I have a couple of friends that ended up that way that I
yeah.
met. We were just like expat teachers, and they are still there.
That's fun. I mean, I highly recommend if you are in college to do study abroad. I just think it's just so mind expanding. It's so great. Wow.
I agree 100%. I think it teaches you lessons that you can't learn any other way. And I
Exactly.
honestly think it should be like a mandatory part of a higher education. Like if you're getting a BA, like it should be mandatory that you spend a semester in
I
a country
agree.
that doesn't speak your own language.
And I don't think that a lot of students understand that it's not that much more expensive, if less expensive sometimes to do it. It can really work out well. So yeah, that's
Yeah, I was lucky to have a scholarship because I do not come from a wealthy family at all. My mother's an immigrant from a small country called Belize,
mm,
in Central America.
yeah,
So
yeah.
um, I was lucky enough to get a scholarship because I was on scholarship at my school there at LMU, and that scholarship was able to cover my study abroad. And then I was doing work study while I was at LMU in order to afford the day to day, like
Mm-hmm.
able to feed myself and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And while I wasn't able to do work study in Japan, they did have a scholarship that they could provide to me that gave me a basic stipend to live off of for the months that I was there. To
Well,
kind
you
of,
know what? That's just so great. That's the greatest
yeah,
story ever, because that is somebody who is utilizing a scholarship to its fullest extent, you know, and that's so great that you got to use all of it and do all of it. It's that's what you can hope. That's what you hope for. You know, it's wonderful that you did the work to do that. So when you
100%.
graduated from college, and you then what happened after that? I mean,
So
after
grad,
Japan, you went to Japan for a little while, and then you came back. Then what happened?
yeah, so I came back because I started to see people that I had graduated with who didn't leave the country for 3 years or 2 years start to get their foot in the door in the industry. And so that was kind of my signal to me that it was time to come back.
Mm,
And so I came back and I continued to teach English because that was the skill that I had that could get me a job immediately.
mhm.
And so I was working at an international school while trying to like work those connects and applying for jobs and trying to finally get my foot in the door until finally someone that I had gone to school and graduated with, she needed an assistant. And I was like, hey, friend, old friend. Remember me?
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, she pulled me in for an interview and I got the job and I was kind of off to the races from there.
And so what job was that?
It was a production assistant, also known as a PA.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the like lowest level production management role where it's a lot of kind of office duties, clerical work
Mm-hmm.
kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I would like to talk a little bit more about that. I like how you cover all this stuff on your TikTok. By the way, you guys have to follow Sam's TikTok because it's just nuggets of such valuable information if this is a field that you're interested in. It's just so great what she's doing. So, um, okay, so you were a PA. What was that when you were working for Cartoon Networks or was that somewhere else?
Cartoon Network was an internship that I did while I was still in school.
Oh, okay.
Which is very similar to the kind of work that PAs do as
Mhm.
a intern. But my first like full job was at DreamWorks. So I
Oh,
was working at
that's
DreamWorks TV specifically.
so cool. So then when did Netflix come about where you are now?
That is more recent. I started at Netflix in November of this year. Um, I was working in production this entire time. I started as a PA, eventually moved up to production coordinator, and then kind of told myself that I was going to stay there at that role, which wasn't demanding too much of me, and was something that I was good at, but it wasn't my passion,
Mm,
and that I would stay there and use the connections that I was able to make to work on my art and to try and make that transition into being a full-time studio artist. And so I had a couple informal mentorships. I had lots of people that were looking at my work. I was constantly talking to HR as well as hiring managers and like getting feedback and continuing to progress. And so it was really great that I had all of those opportunities. But it was really much like me blazing my own path. There wasn't
mhm.
a structure set up to help someone like me who was like already at the studio but wanted to switch into art. It was really me having to like knock down doors and open
Mhm.
windows and crawl through and be like, hey, what's up? So
Yeah.
I eventually got to a point where all of the people that I was speaking to, all the artists that I was speaking to was like, yes, your work is great. Like, it's not a matter of if, but when at this point, like, we'll keep an eye out for you. It's going to happen any day now. I'm in that position. And all of a sudden I get this phone call from Netflix and they're like, hey, but how about recruiting? And I was like, I'm sorry, what? Excuse me? I had definitely applied for jobs at Netflix, but for like production work and for artist roles, never for a recruiting job. I had never even
Right.
considered recruiting as a career path for me. But then I talked to the recruiter and she gave me the job description. And I had this moment of clarity where I realized that they were describing in that job description, they were describing who I already was rather than me trying to get a job of something that I wanted to be. And
Ooh.
that clarity like really pushed me to take the leap of faith, and talking to my wife and my wife being like, yeah, this is describing you, this is who you are,
Nice.
was like, okay, I need to do this. And so that's how I made that sharp turn into early career recruiting, which is what I do now. And I am getting work as an artist, but it's freelance work, which I'm actually really liking that balance.
Yeah. This is an interesting story. I have so many questions. Um, can you explain in a little more detail, like what you are actually doing and like in outreach? Like what does your job actually really look like on a day to day?
Sure. So recruiting as a whole is like a small department of people who are the ones that go out and find the talent. So we're the ones who are attending the conventions, putting on the panels. We're the ones that like on boots on the ground trying to find people who do the work that we hire for. And then we work with the specific productions, the specific show or movie, and we say, what are you looking for? What kind of person do you need? What kind of artist do you need? And then we kind of go through our databases and say, here are the people that you should interview, here are the people that you should talk to. So that's like recruiting in general in the animation space. For me specifically, I work for outreach and engagement, which is a subset of recruiting that specifically works on early career. And our whole thing is that it's really hard to break into the industry. You kind of have to know somebody, or you have to be well connected through school or something, which inherently comes with a lot of bias and privilege. And so our job is to break down all those barriers to entry and to democratize the process and make it much more easy and accessible for folks who maybe aren't coming from a place of privilege, but do have the talent, the passion, and the drive.
I love it. I think that's just that's great. Was that something that you initiated, or was that coming from Netflix?
That's coming from Netflix. That was part of so the Netflix animation studio is brand new. I think it's roughly 3 years old. Netflix, the platform, has a lot of animation on it, but that animation wasn't made by Netflix. It was just like we ordered someone else to make us a show. But now we're making our own content, and that studio is only 3 years old. And their whole thing is like, we want to be as good, if not better, than the legacy studios, your Nickelodeon, your Disney, your Cartoon Network, within 5 years.
This is so good. I'm so happy to hear. I'm just so happy to hear that's happening. And I did not know that Netflix was animation studios was so young. So that's also really interesting. You said something that I'm going to kind of sidetrack and ask you another question off of something that you said about how you are recruiting the talent. You find people that are talented, and then when a project comes along, you're like, oh, we've got this person, that person that can fill that what you're looking for. So would you say for somebody who's starting out, who's just maybe came out of animation school or self-taught, how would they get on your radar then, so they would be in that pool of talent that you could possibly pull from?
That's a great question. There's a couple ways. The most straightforward is applying for jobs. When you apply for a job on a job board, that comes into our databases first. Hiring managers working on a specific product don't see those applications unless we give it to them.
I see.
So that's the most direct and straightforward way. But I will say, we just finished this process for our story trainee program, where we put out a call for, I think it was open for 3 weeks, and we had over 2,000 applications.
Oh my gosh.
So it's hard to stand out in that crowd, right? And so then that's where you kind of lean into your social media presence and your portfolio, especially if you're going for a creative role. That portfolio has to like really pop. I like to tell people to really lean into branding yourself.
That was one of the questions for you. Yeah. Go on. Yeah.
If you have strong branding across your portfolio, your resume, your website, your social media accounts, then that makes you stand out to me, because I've seen that logo in multiple places now, and I'm more likely to remember who you are, so I can come back to you later when I have a job opportunity.
It's interesting. I was having this conversation with my daughter about this, because she does not like social media, but it's kind of that necessary evil if you want to be in an industry like this, or you are an artist. I mean, you have to at some point decide that you're going to share your art with the world, and you want people to see it if you want to work in it, if you want to be a working artist. And I'm glad that you brought that up about the website. I was going to ask you that. So you feel that everybody who is going out into this industry, they should have a very polished looking website, even if it's a password protected one, Well, why don't you talk about that? Do you think that, because I can tell you from a different aspect, from surface design art in a different world of being an artist, that is a very password protected industry, because those are designs that will be coming out like the next season, the next year. So only people who are buying those products would actually look at that, as opposed to maybe sharing too much of your personal intellectual property on your website. I mean, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot to consider when it comes to posting your art online. I personally come from the camp of like, it is better to lean into it and post more rather to be precious about it. Especially if you're posting it, you have your signature, it now comes with, it's now embedded with that timestamp.
Mm-hmm.
So if someone does like steal your art, you have the proof of like, no, I did this first.
Yeah, it's kind of the Wild West out there, you know.
It is very much a Wild West out there.
I mean,
And
you
I
just
think
got to
if it's
kind of get
something,
over it. If it's good, it's gonna get knocked off at some point. But you're right. I mean, that is some protection.
it is. And I think for the kind of roles that like I'm looking at, you're not posting your intellectual property so per se. Like you're not, you shouldn't be at least posting like your original concept for a show that you eventually want to have created. And like that's what you're posting.
Right.
Like that should be the kind of thing that you're keeping more close to the chest until you're able to make it yourself, or you can start trying to pitch it and sell it to studios.
Great advice.
But like the other work that you do, your drawing, like your sketchbook, pages of your sketchbook. Let me see what you did today. What was your warm-up? What did your warm-up look like? Or maybe you just did a practice where you gave yourself a prompt and you were like, and this is what that prompt ended up looking like. And I don't love it enough to put it in my portfolio, but it's something that I did today. Posting that kind of stuff like doesn't come with that same scary, like someone's going to steal this, because you're not really trying to do anything with it other than art for art's sake.
I like that. I like that very much. That's great advice. Do you find that it's important to see the face of the artist?
No,
Okay.
no, I don't think so. There might be people who do want to know, and there's definitely a push lately for more diversity and inclusion initiatives in which people are going to want to know all of your various intersections and how you identify as a human being in order to kind of help meet those quotas. That's also a bit of a Wild West right now in the recruiting world, where we're like, what is the ethic and legal ramifications and possibilities in that? But I don't think you have to put your face out there. In fact, if you have a social media account that you're putting your art to and that you're sharing with recruiters and other professionals in the industry, it shouldn't be the same social media account that you have all of your personal posts on. Like they need to be two separate accounts.
I agree. Yeah. Good. I love that. Okay, well, we kind of skipped over another question I thought was kind of interesting, and that's and you talk about this on your TikTok, which I really appreciated you sharing this advice, because this is something that we tried to talk about on the show, is college versus self-taught. And I'd love to hear your kind of pros and cons on that for art school. You did bring up that it was a colleague of yours that you got a job. And I think that's one of the things that they say when you go to college, like take a look around at your classmates, because one of them may hire you one day, you know?
That's exactly what happened.
Yeah, exactly. It's like the first day. That's what they tell you when you get in college. But what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that it's necessary?
I do not think that it's necessary, like carte blanche, but I do think that it depends on the person. So like I mentioned earlier, I'm the kind of person that needs a lot of structure. I could not have done this on my own. Like I needed a school-based system to really push me to do the things that I did. That being said, there are some people who don't work in that kind of environment and are able to be self-starters and push themselves and learn it, seek out and learn the kinds of things that they need to. So I always say that like we don't look at what school you went to. That does not matter to us. What we look at is the final product.
Oh,
We look
that's
at
great to know.
your work. Yeah. So you don't need like that diploma, that paper.
Mm-hmm.
What you need is the skills, and however you get those skills is like whatever works best for you and who you are.
That is so great because I think that a lot of people get hung up on that, like what the degree is and all of that. It's like, if can you do the work and are you talented? I mean, that's really what it comes down to, right?
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. And there's a lot of alternatives out there nowadays, like not schools, but places where you can take courses and classes to like learn these specific
mhm.
animation jobs.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing how much technology has come forward where it is something that you can just learn at home. It's awesome. But complicated too. It's a lot of work.
Yes. Yeah,
Um,
it's a lot more work for sure.
so let's say you graduated and you do have a degree. Let's just or not, whatever. You've done the work, you've taught yourself, you have the degree. Either way, you've got some experience now, but you don't have like any um, work experience other than maybe an intern or something. Where would somebody start? And
It
how does that look? What does that look like?
it depends on the art discipline that you're trying to get into. Like the starting point is a little different for all of them.
Okay,
Um,
let's talk about art then. So let's talk about like if you want to be like in the storyboarding world or something like that aspect of it.
yeah, for a storyboard artist, the a position called a storyboard revisionist is your entry level position, and that typically will not be on a feature. That's going to usually only be on a television show. Um, and a revisionist job is to basically like clean up the boards of the storyboard artist. The reason why that is because the timeline, the turnaround, the pace of a TV show is so fast because you're cranking out so many episodes that the storyboard artist already needs to move on to their next episode. So when they board something and they get all of these notes, they're not necessarily addressing the notes themselves. It's then being passed on to you, the revisionist, to clean up drawings, to address those notes, and so that it can proceed into the next phase of animation. So that's a really great entry level position where you
Hmm.
get to learn the ropes, you get to learn from people who are working professionals. You get to understand a little bit better about what the production pipeline looks like. So that's the entry level position there.
That's really great. So you also mentioned that PA being a P was another way that you could start in if you want to maybe be on the more the booking area or like coordinating, scheduling. Is that correct?
Yeah, so a lot of people will actually use being a PA as a foot in the door to go literally anywhere else within the animation industry,
Okay.
because it is such a like a low barrier to entry for those jobs. It's like I mentioned before, it's like your clerical office management type work. So taking notes, managing deadlines, people's calendars, managing files and making sure everything is like filed away and categorized and clean, answering a ton of emails. It's that kind of stuff. So you don't need
Mm-hmm.
any animation skill in order or knowledge really to be able to do it. So it's a really good way to get your foot in the door and to learn more about studio culture, and then start networking and meeting people who can then get you your next job in whatever art discipline that is that you're more interested in. Or you can stay working in production management, which is its own career in itself and leads up to you eventually like managing an entire crew, an entire show or movie, um, and you get a producer credit for that.
Wow. Guys, this is so good. I knew you'd be awesome to talk to. What about if you want to be like on the writing side of it or the music side of it? Is that a whole different pathway?
Is, yeah, those are definitely still like pathways that are utilized within animation, but they're outside of like your typical production workflow. So I don't actually know a whole lot about them. I know for writing, a lot of people will get in as the script coordinator or a writer's assistant.
Hmm.
And then they can get into writing that way. And then music usually comes from like the post-production team, and I've never worked in post before. So I honestly don't know a lot about that. But within production, you have your storyboard artists, you also have CG artists, and you have your designers. And so those are other tracks that you can take within the production of an animated film or movie or TV show.
That's really awesome. What about, I saw on one of your posts that you talked about the Animation Guild. Can you explain a little bit more about what they do, and is that an important thing that someone should belong to?
So the Animation Guild is the union here in LA for people who work in the animation industry as creatives. So I have never been a part of the union because I've always worked in like outside of creative roles and more supportive roles.
Oh, okay.
But I hire people into the union. So most of, or all of the big animation studios are union studios. And then your smaller, like more indie or freelance or commercial houses are not going to be union based. The union is mandatory. So if you're working at a union studio, you have to join the union. And then you have to pay union dues, which I believe is biannually. And what the union does for you is, first of all, they set a lot of rules to help animators not get overworked. You'll hear a lot of horror stories in the video game world of people being worked like 80 hours a week, no time off. They don't even get to go home to say hi to their families. And that kind of stuff does not happen in the animation world because of the union. So the union puts in those protections in place to keep you from being overworked. And then they also, because animation work in the studio system, you don't work for a studio when you get hired in. You work for a production. So you got hired to work on this particular show. And when that show is over, your job is over. And so the union provides like your benefits, your time off, your sick days and stuff like that. They have oversight over all of that so that that goes with you from studio to studio. Or if you have a latency period between work, you still have healthcare, you still have all of these benefits with you.
Wow, that's just really helpful to know. That's great information as well. Thank you. Do you feel that you need to live in LA if you want to be in this industry?
If not LA, one of the other cities that have a concentration, there's a couple in Canada, Toronto and Vancouver, both have a lot of animation studios. Los Angeles, New York, if you're okay with working in like commercials and more VFX type things. I think those are going to be kind of your main places. Yeah, those are really going to be your main places to find work within North America. And then there are some others more abroad. That being said, with the whole COVID situation,
I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah. One of the great things about animation is that like we did not stop ever. When quarantine happened and everybody switched to working from home, we took like a week to make sure we got all of our tech set up at home, and then we just kept on going. Whereas like the live action industry, like Hollywood shut down for months. But animation never had that because we realized very quickly that we are able to work remotely without really much of a change to what we do. So I don't know what it's going to be like in the future, if people are going to want everyone to come back into the studio or if they're going to stay all remote or find some kind of hybrid situation. That's still to be determined.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? It is still to be determined. In a lot of industries, it really shook things up.
I will say as a quick caveat that because I'm dealing with this right now with people that I'm hiring, where they're coming to work for Netflix, which is a union studio, but they don't live in LA, so they're not a part of the union. which means like we set them up with benefits and things like that, of course, but it's not the same as like the union benefits that carries with you from place to place. And so that means like once their job wraps and the job is over, that's it, they're done.
They don't
And
have
they're
that
not
continuation. Ah.
exactly. So like you might want to move just so that you can be eligible for that, but that's the only caveat.
Huh, so interesting. Okay, let's see. I see on your platform that you are passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and improving the state of that in the industry. So, what efforts do you take, or what does that look like?
Yeah, that's definitely something I'm really passionate about. As a person of multiple intersections myself,
Mhm.
I've had to fight battles as the only woman in the room, the only Black person in the room, the only gay person in the room. Like there have definitely been times when like I have felt really marginalized and I've had to like stand up and speak for an entire culture of people or subset of people, which is not okay.
Mhm.
And
Agreed.
so one of the things that we definitely do to help is really evening out the playing field in the hiring that we do. So like I mentioned, we don't care what school you went to. Like we honestly don't look at anything. We barely look at your name. We just look at the work and we make our
Wow.
decisions based off of that. We're also starting up a new program yet that hasn't actually been announced, but it will be targeting specific communities to help give that leg up so that they can be competing at the same level as people who do come from places of privilege. So like you might not have access to the same things because of the differences in the way that you have to live your life,
Right.
which I am one of those people. Like I really had, like I mentioned, the child of an immigrant. So I really had to like push
Right.
to get everything that I've had. And so we're really kind of finding those people and saying, here, we're going to help you. So that we're not going to like prioritize you over anyone else, but we're going to give you a fighting chance so that you can compete at the same level as everybody else.
Well, it's about time. So do you,
Yeah.
so that's through Netflix, is that what you're saying? Or is this your personal platform too? I mean, it seems like you're kind of, it's a personal passion, but it's also with Netflix as well.
Yes. Yeah, it's both. It's
I'm
definitely both. And
happy to hear
I'm
that.
really, that was one of the reasons why I made the switch over to Netflix, because they are being so conscious and like that's at the forefront of everything that Netflix does, is that idea of inclusion and diversity.
That is
Whereas
so
at other
great.
studios that I've worked at, it was kind of a fight to get them to consider it.
Even now, that was going to be my next question. Like, do you feel that other people that it's happening elsewhere in the industry as well, or no?
I think everyone's talking about it. Everyone's wanting to do better and to do more. Um, but I think I had a mentor in school who said that Hollywood is a dumb shark that eats money. And it is very true.
How interesting.
So I always think of that when I think about like being able to make those changes. Like Hollywood is just going for the money. And so it won't be until they see the
Yeah,
monetary benefit in that will they
right.
really invest in it. What's different about Netflix is that like Netflix, the streaming behemoth, has all the money in the world,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
So money is never a question, is never an object when we're doing our workings within the studio. They're like, here you go, take the money you need. We really want you to do these things because these are the things that we care about. And it's not something that I've heard of any other studio doing.
Me neither. I'm so glad I have a Netflix account. I think that's really very encouraging, and I'm glad that you shared that with us because it's great. It's wonderful. I really appreciate that. I appreciate the work that you're doing on not only your personal work, but all of it. It's nice to hear that Netflix is doing that. That's great.
Yeah, like my TikTok that you've referenced, and I
Yeah,
also keep up a Instagram and a
yeah, and
Twitter.
I follow you on both.
Thank you.
Yeah, I like what you post. I think it's great. Everybody needs to follow you. I'll put
Yes,
the links
please.
they'll be in the show notes for sure.
But all of that, like that's not my work that I'm doing. That's just me. That's just passion project stuff.
See,
Um,
that's what I was so drawn to you, because that's kind of what this podcast is. It's just information. It's like, let's all help each other. This is called supporting the arts, you know?
yeah,
So
yeah.
I felt that through that
I
energy
just
through the work you're doing. It's great.
Thank you. I myself had to work so hard to get where I am, and I had to really like blaze my own trail and make my own
Mm-hmm.
path. And I want to help people behind me who so they don't have to do that. So they can put more of their effort into their art
To
rather into just
creating.
being heard. Yeah.
Yes. All ships rise together. It's
Yes.
and this competitive mindset is, or the money mindset, the shark and all of that, like it's an old construct that needs to just go away now.
Yeah. Yeah. We can't be crabs in a barrel. We've got to really help each
Yes,
other.
yes, 1000%. So speaking of helping each other, I always like to wrap things up with asking what the best advice was given to you when you were starting out. There was any words of advice that resonated with you that you'd like to share?
I think, oh man, that's such a big question.
I know, and there's probably tons of different. It's so interesting to see what different people have. Um, the answers that I get to this is very interesting.
Yeah, I think definitely just like being yourself. There's, especially when you're trying to break into the industry, your instinct is to want to say like, what can I do differently to make you like me?
Hmm.
Like what can I bring? What kind of art can I create that will make you more interested in what I'm doing? And I believe that that's the wrong tactic, and that
Mm-hmm.
it's
Mm-hmm.
really you leaning into who you are and what you do, and bringing your full authentic self and voice into your work, and that's going to be what makes you stand out. That's what's going to make somebody take interest in you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you back that up with what you say about what you're looking for when you're actually recruiting. You're not even looking at the name; you're like looking at the work. So make it your best, truest work. That's wonderful advice. Well, this has been great, Sam. Thank you so much. I appreciate it so much, and thank you again for being here today and sharing with us. And everybody must go follow you.
Yes, please. And thank you for having me. This was fun.
Yeah, definitely. Yay.